Hi guys, welcome back to a new video. So today is going to be a little bit of an edit, not so much a speed edit, because I actually wanted to take you guys through what I would do in a situation where we wanted to do a safety shot considering a newborn and two large Rottweilers. Now, this client absolutely loves her fur babies, and I felt like it was very important, since we didn't get them in the maternity session, that we would definitely get them in the newborn session. And I wanted to do it in a very safe manner, not because her dogs at all were going to intentionally harm their newborn. However, their dogs are very, very loving. So their dogs were actually just very large. You can see that here. She has two very large dogs, and I wanted to make sure that we did this in a very safe manner. So I made sure that I took first the picture of the bucket just by itself, how I was going to have it posed, and I literally shot them as best as I could from a similar perspective. So at first you saw me just choosing the images in Lightroom. I didn't feel like you guys needed to see that for very long, so I sped through it. So I chose one picture of Jumanji, that's their girl. Then I chose one picture of Jurassic, that's their bigger boy, Rottweiler. And then, of course, I took a picture of the baby and then the bucket by itself. So that's all you saw me doing in the beginning, was just showing you how I chose the images. And I made sure to shoot them on different sides of the buckets on purpose. Now, of course, in choosing, you saw that the backdrop was a little messed up, but I wasn't worried about that. As long as I got them on some type of brown, I know that I can go ahead and fix that in post-production on my own. However, because I traveled to this client's house, I was working with a fabric floor. This floor backdrop is from Baby Dreams Backdrops, and I really like their pieces because they photograph so vivid. They also photograph looking extremely real. So here I'm putting in their girl, Rottweiler, and right now I'm just trying to match up the buckets as far as that outer white fabric, just to make sure that I can go ahead and get her as close as possible to that. So here I'm just using a layer mask so that I can get her in there, and then I will invert that layer mask. But I wanted to mask her in this way, just this way I know that I'm not missing any ear, I'm not missing a fur, I'm not missing any parts of her foot, and then I would invert it. So I know it looks a little crazy right now. However, once I change it over and then I make my fine tuning, it would look, it'll actually look much, much better. So here you can see I've inverted it. So now she's standing on what looks like the straighter backdrop. And here I'm kind of playing around with what I want to do as far as like messing with her shadows to see if I can make it look realistic. And here I just decide to go ahead and fix the bucket. And at some point I'm going to scoot her just a little closer. And then later on, once I have her brother in the frame, I'm going to fix part of their shadowing. So as you saw, I went ahead and I scooted her over just a tad bit. And here I'm going to fix the blanket, because I wanted to make sure it looks like it was sitting on top of her foot, just to kind of add a little more realism to the image. Because of course I am putting 4 images together to make this one large composite for mom and dad, because I felt like it was very important. Like, people, they absolutely love their pets. And in that, and in that case, they really do see them as family, and they are, like, they really do become part of your family. So I wanted to make sure that, being that we couldn't get them with the maternity session, because of course they're so big and they're very playful, like they wanted to play. This one, her name is Jurassic. She is actually much older than the other one that you'll see. He was a little more rambunctious. He wanted to play immediately as coming in the house. So I can imagine trying to wrangle 2 very energetic dogs while you're pregnant, and then her husband, her husband is there as well, but again, there's two of them. So right now I'm just lightly masking in some of that shadow that was originally on the other backdrop, just again to add more realism. So I'm going to mask in what I can see, and then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of what I don't want to see, what I feel like just doesn't look real. So there's a wrinkle around her foot that I'm going to start to mask out at some point, just to make sure that her foot, or the fabric around her foot, is as smooth as possible. However, I did want to bring back part of the floor plank to make sure that it looked really, really good. Now with things like this, I like to do my fine tuning at the end. I kind of just use a rough estimate of like, okay, let me add the object there, and then let me go ahead and take my time and really like work around, like as you can see, I'm working around her ears, her fur, just because I want to make sure that every piece of her, as the field, as the depth of field changes, that every piece of their dog is in the picture. At no point with a composite do you want it to really look fake. Mom and dad, of course, know that this picture was not taken together. They helped me with the dogs and everything, so of course they know this picture was not done together, but I still want it to look as real as if it could have possibly been done as a full shot. Now, altogether, this image took me about 45 minutes to edit. Now, I know that sounds like a long time. That sounds like a good stretch of time. And not going to lie to you, it is. However, with the end result that I got, I was more than happy to have spent that much time on an edit that I know that they'll cherish, especially with little mama being safe, her dogs being safe. But you can see like the excitement. So I'm just clicking back and forth to see if I masked it in really good, and then to see what places I could like fine tune. So places that just kind of stood out, and that piece kind of just resembled a tail that she just did not have. And here I'm just fixing the wrinkle that was underneath her, because of course two very, very, very energetic dogs on a fabric backdrop. The fabric backdrop was not going to stay put. So right here at this point is where I wanted to go ahead and fix the fact that she was just a little bit on the softer side. So I used an action from my own set that I created myself, my unsharpened mask action, to go ahead and add a little bit more detail to her face. She was a little off as far as the depth of field to the bucket. So, but this was the best shot that we got of her as far as like paying attention and everything like that. So here you'll see I'll run into a little bit of an issue because Jurassic is so large. So in this, of course, he's off the backdrop a little bit, but again, I said I just needed him to be on something brown, so that was totally fine. But as you see, me try to match up the buckets here as, as best as size goes, not really like for the image to match up 100%. But as far as size goes, his head is completely cut off, and me making him any smaller will not look realistic. So what I actually have to do is make the original image larger. So you'll actually see me do that. So here I'm playing with it just to see if I could like actually fit him on here and make it look some type of real, but the best I'm getting is like at his nose, and that is just not going to work. It's not going to work. So quickly I figure out that I need to go ahead and extend the backdrop with Jumanji on it so that I could go ahead and add Jurassic in. So here you'll see me, instead of trying to either crop out, like give it more space or distort the file in itself, what I did was I like to create a a copy. So like Command J, I like to create a copy of the background, and I like to either, like, if I'm gonna make something closer, I'm gonna just zoom in a little bit, like make the image larger. This way I don't really distort any of like the pixels that are already there. I'm not cropping anything, I'm not losing any data. And then if I need to make something larger, like here, I will size the original, well, the original copy down a little bit. This way I could do what I need to do. So after Command J, I went ahead and hit Command E to merge the layer down. And now I'm creating more floor that will work so that I can put in Jurassic as easy as possible. This way all of him can go in there. But again, that just goes to show you just how much bigger he is than Jumanji. And if I do say so myself, I absolutely love their names. Jumanji and Jurassic. I think that is hilarious to go for some of the sweetest dogs in the world. However, like, mom and dad thought it was so cool. Dad's a gamer and mom is very much interested in it as well. So I thought that was really cool that they had really cute, like, unique names for dogs. You know, dogs usually have like Spot or Ben, or I don't know, something generic. That was pretty cool that they did not have something generic. Not Ben, more like Rocky or something. I don't know. Anyway, here I'm just still extending the backdrop, trying to get as close to it as possible. Now this is not going to be perfect. What I do first is I try my best to get my lines correct. I try to get my lines as close as possible. Here I copied just a little bit of the ear. So I actually want to use a filled so that it could kind of just copy the area and not so much a specific spot. This is something that I like to do a lot, that always really works out for me. Like I feel like Photoshop has really done a great job with that tool, the fill tool. It didn't used to always do so well. However, lately it's been doing much better. And I just wanted to make sure that I copied an area as best as I possibly can. So when I do fill, I definitely use content aware. This way it can copy the areas around it. Now here you'll see me do this like 2 or 3 times, but that's because my line was looking a little lumpy and a little wonky, just just not as straight as it could have been. So I wound up doing that 3 times to make sure that it was nice and straight. Especially since she's the smaller dog, so she's gonna have more head space. He, not so much, which is why I don't necessarily focus on the backdrop on his area, because I know he's going to cover a good chunk of it. So I'm just gonna address this line really fast. I'm gonna do it twice. The first time I really do not like the way that looks, so I go back and I do it the second time, just getting rid of that line of demarcation, like of where you can actually see that I resized the image down. So again, I know that this is a really long edit, even though this video is only it's less than 40 minutes. This edit definitely took me a little over 45 minutes. Some pieces, of course, are sped up in here just to make better use of time. But this was definitely a labor of love, trying to, kind of figure out how I'm going to do these images. So this was the first one that I did of her gallery, just to make sure that this image was definitely done. And I had a good time doing it. It was pretty cool to see how I was going to get this thing done. So here you can see me playing with sizing, just trying to match up the bucket. Well, not really match it up. Again, just kind of make sure that everything is a little proportionate. This way, when they look at this, they can kind of, see that, okay, their dogs are not like abnormally small or abnormally big compared to the baby. So that was a really good thing with having that bucket in that shot, because I was able to see, you know, like, okay, how big do I need to make them? So again, here I'm doing the exact same thing that I did with Jumanji with Jurassic. I'm just masking to make sure that I don't miss any fur, don't miss any parts of him. Now, when I change it over, of course, it looks crazy. Like, it looks absolutely nuts. However, I know that it's not going to stay this way. So right now, I'm trying to mask out as much of their real floor as possible. Even though it's brown, I just kind of want to get rid of it as much as I need. And then later on, you'll see me bring part of it back, but at a very, very low opacity. I think like either 20 or 30%. But here, I'm just cleaning him up. And as you guys can see, I made it big enough, just enough for his head to kind of like fit on top. So again, just fine tuning around his fur. And the floor is going to be, well, was the trickier part for me. And now looking back, of course, there's some things that I would have done a little different. However, I'm still proud of the end result because it still looks really, really good. To the untrained eye, it looks really good. And so here I'm just quick selecting the bucket because he's in the bucket right now. He's floating over the bucket and that doesn't look real. So I just did a quick selection real quick just so that I can get as clean of a mask as possible. So I'm just going to mask away his leg in the bucket area. This way now it looks like he's standing beside it. So there's a lot to like clean up around the legs. And as you know, you guys will be able to see it. I'm doing my level best to get him as shadowed as possible in some areas and clean his feet up. And because he was actually standing in the wrap, it was like, okay, this is pretty cool to kind of play around with because the wrap is already on the floor in the original image. So I was like, okay, maybe if we extend it a little bit, just to, you know, for a little more realism because the shadows are original in his image, where it'll actually make sense of him standing in that wrap. So again, it's just a lot of like fine tuning, a lot of back and forth, a lot of trying to see what's going to work, what's not going to work. And in this case, putting that wrap on the floor because again, he's missing an entire paw. He's missing a whole paw. So I wanted to incorporate that wrap because it just made sense. He was already standing in it. So again, here I am just adding in some of that natural shadow that he had. Now he had much darker shadows because he was further back from the light, and two, because he is much bigger, much bigger. So he had some real estate work, you know, working with him. However, he was a little more rambunctious. So his oh gosh, what are they? His wrinkles actually were a little more prominent. So I did my level best to kind of get rid of those wrinkles as much as possible. However, I definitely wanted to work with his shadow. So here, like I said earlier, I brought back in some of the original floor that he was near, which is their actual home floor, but it was more so for his shadow. I just needed to have a little bit of something to replicate later on when it came to adding a little more shadow in. So here I'm deliberating on what I want to do with his feet because the wrap going around his feet just looks weird because of how the wrap is lit in the original image versus how it's lit in his image. So I just decide like, okay, maybe to have his feet look like they were both under that fabric in some way. And I felt like it looked pretty okay as far as getting his feet to kind of match up. Now here I'm just working on the wrap, kind of trying to give it as much blend as possible so that it doesn't look like it's a wrap from two different images. But I'm working with different opacities. As you guys can see, I'm working on 30% right now, and I know I flip-flop back and forth between 30 and then 20 sometimes, just to see what is going to look a little bit more real. Here I wanted to add a little more shadow because, again, this is on the darker side of the bucket. My light is actually coming from my left hand side, which is not where I usually place my light, but working with baby and turning the light around, I wound up shooting from my left side, which was fine. I usually shoot from my right, however, so this time around, just working, trying to make sure that the bucket, the darker side of the bucket, remains the darker side of the bucket. So as you guys can see, Jurassic is a little darker than Jumanji, again, because he was much further from the light source, but he's also on the right side of the bucket. So again, just trying to keep that real, which is why I shot them on two different sides of the bucket instead of shooting both of them on the same side and then trying to make him look like he was shot on the opposite side. That would have been, oh gosh, that would have been such such a headache. So here I think I'm pretty much okay with what the wrap looks like as far as like the shadowing and the highlights and everything. So here I'm just going to use so here I'm going to actually use one of my totally rad actions. It's called Yin and Yang, but basically it's like dodge and burn without having to use the dodge and burn tool. Now I use this on an extremely low opacity, either 5 or 7 most of the time. If I'm working with a person's face, it's usually 5 because 7 is just a little bit too much. Here I'm working with 7 because I can go a little darker with his shadows. So I'm just going to shadow where I feel like his body's shadow would have fallen, and then just kind of follow some of those natural shadows. So I'm just darkening under him. And again, this was me pulling the original shadows just to see where they would fall. So I'm just giving him as much of a dark shadow as possible where it'll look realistic, especially because of how big he is. So his shadow is actually going to like feather different places. And I think that's why I like using it at such an extremely low opacity instead of going to like a 10 or something. Anything above 10% is going to be ridiculously dark. So I like to gradually just add that. And with her, I'm going to add a little bit more shadow and just in the areas that it would have been with her original image. So just add a little bit more so that, you know, it looks a little bit more realistic because they are darker dogs. So the light, the way the light is going to fall on them is just going to fall, you know, kind of around what it looks like now. And I just wanted to make it look like they were really settled into this picture. I didn't want any parts of them to be way too light compared to this really light pink bucket. So right now I'm masking off the shadow on the dogs at 100%. This way they are highlighted and their areas are just like, you know, the areas that they're sitting over are just darker. We don't want to lose too much detail in them. However, we still want them to kind of look like they're in place. So I feel like it being darkened really did help to add the realism, because otherwise it just kind of makes them look like they're sitting on top of the image. So here I'm getting it off of his face because again, he is on the darker side of the image. So I want to make sure he's as light as possible without making him a little too light. And you guys will see what I mean when I said instead of making him a little too light, because I believe right after this, I go to do an adjustment layer to try to brighten them up a little bit. So here I'm just using a frequency separation action that I have that I learned from Flern years ago. And I'm just going to replicate an area where the texture and the color are going to change a little bit for the wrinkles underneath Jurassic. So here I'm using the fill adjustment tool well, not fill adjustment, fill tool, just to kind of get rid of those wrinkles a little bit and use the texture that's around him, just kind of mimic that texture. And I didn't necessarily want to touch his legs because, again, this is a separation, so it's only going to sample the color of his legs and not the actual texture, so it would just look weird. So here I'm just fine tuning some things. This way it doesn't look so uniform or super weird or anything like that. And this is what I meant by making them too light. I feel like this just kind of like, you know, brought out brought out a little bit more detail than I necessarily wanted. So here I'm just getting rid of his other image, and now it's just time to add little mama. So again, I lower my opacity, of course, a little bit too much, but I lowered my opacity this way I could see her and see how I'm going to place her. And this, here I am resizing her to make sure that she's going to fit into the image just as proportionate. And again, can't stress enough like how great it is to have a marker in the image to make sure that everybody is the right size. So I only twisted it a little bit because I felt like her face was a little weirdly placed. However, this was the end of the very end of the shoot. Just about right after this, we did parent shots and we're done. Little mama was kind of like over it at some point. So here I am just speeding up, me masking her in because you've watched me do it in real time with the first dog. So no need to keep beating the same drum. So right now I'm just putting her in the bucket to make sure that she looks like she belongs here. And again, using my 30% opacity just to kind of gradually put her shadows in and play with the edges of certain things. So like the edge of the fabric, the edge of the bucket, the edge of her hair, her fingers. You'll see all of that. So I'll go back and forth with kind of like fine tuning how I want the blanket to look, because again, shooting this bucket like 4 different times in 4 different shots, things are going to move. So you just want to get them as close as possible without stressing yourself like, oh my gosh, they don't exactly match up. And that's fine. Most of the time they won't exactly match up, but you got to get it just as close as possible. And that's even with the froggy pose and everything like that, because that is supposed to be done with a composite. Just the same way. You just get it as close as you possibly can. So again, I'm just working on the backdrop and where the blanket ends versus where her shadow starts, and just trying to see what works the best. Again, back to 20% opacity just to kind of get that in there so that everything is working together. And I flip back and forth between 20 and 100 just to make sure that, you know, certain pieces are not on her skin that don't belong to be on her, that don't belong on her skin. So this is why I said it's not so much a speed edit, because you're actually watching part of this in real time. As far as like what I do, some of the pauses are just for me to like think something through real quick. Like, okay, how would you handle this? Because again, every composite that I go into, it's like I kind of have an idea of how I want it to look. However, it doesn't always, you know, fall in place super easy. And after I get her all nestled into the bucket, I worry about her fingers, because now her fingers are overlapping a little bit of the bucket. So that is, what you saw me do was just change the hardness of the brush. This way it's as soft as possible. This way it kind of feathers. Right before this I had changed it to be a little harder. this way it had a little bit more of an edge, especially for the dogs. So now here you see me just resize the image a little bit because there was a little more ground at the bottom, more than I would have liked. So I went ahead and again, I cropped in without using that crop tool. And here you'll see me start to work on little mama's skin. So right now, the action that I do like to use on my newborns, especially when they have baby acne or they have red splotches, I like to use the deblotch tool to go ahead and even out some of those spots beforehand. And as I'm evening out her skin, I'm watching how it's evening out, and this is when I realized that I'm actually working in Photoshop, like for Pro Photos RGB instead of standard RGB. So at some point you're going to see me go ahead and change it over, because it just is it's acting the way it's supposed to. However, it's not at the same time. So that's the cool part of kind of like getting used to doing this. So as at some point after this, I think I'm going to try to run a red splotches action that's going to show you exactly what I mean. It's gonna just kind of go on weird where I'm like, all right, this can't be standard RGB. But right now I'm using my magic eraser tool from Totally Rad. I mean magic eraser action from Totally Rad, just to get rid of some of her baby acne spots. She doesn't have very much of it. She's also an older baby. Well, not really an older baby. She was a little bit out of my time frame. So she had time to kind of like develop the acne. However, like majority of her flaking was gone and her belly button was already gone. As far as her umbilical cord, that was already gone. But she was a really good baby. Like she slept pretty well. And I always use my heater, and that was the one thing that she definitely loved. So when the heater was off, she was definitely like looking at me like, "Hey sis, where's my warmth? What are we doing?" So again, just getting off the flakes. Right now I'm going to back out just to make sure that all of this looks decent. And here is where I'm going to try to run that redness replacer action, and it's going to go on pink. And that's when I realized like, that's not how that's supposed to work. And that's when I'm like, yeah, this, I definitely was right. Like this looks wonky. So as you can see, I'm still trying to like get that red out, and I'm just like, okay, something is off. Something is super off. Because usually it would have neutralized all of that red by now, and all it's doing is kind of like playing with it. And there I go. Go change it. So now I'm gonna go back and try it again, but of course at a much lower opacity now. But first I'm gonna just mask it off. I'm using my brush at 30% instead of 100 because I did already take some of that redness out, but I mean very minimal redness out. However, I just wanted to get the areas that where her baby acne was. so that it didn't look, you know, just so red. So here I'm just going to clean up places where the red is just really, really like evident, and do it at a very low opacity. And I keep my flow at 100% because I usually do not lift my brush very often. And, you know, with the flow, you would kind of want to lift the brush for the brush strokes. So here I'm just going to use this action to kind of smooth out her skin just a little bit. And on her hands, just parts of her body, because I don't really need to smooth out everything because I had already done the blotch action. So again, I usually miss all detail spots as far as like the eyebrows, the eyelashes, the lips, for the most part, the cupid's bow. I usually do the knee, well, obviously the knee, but I usually do like the chin of the baby, and I try my best to avoid eyelids unless the eyelids really need like some help. But here you'll see me bring the bridge of her nose back. That was what that brush was, me actually bringing the bridge of her nose back, and I felt like it wasn't enough detail anymore in it. So I went back and did my yin and yang and just brought her nose in a little bit. And I'm going to pull back just to make sure she doesn't look like I super contoured her nose, and I feel like that looks really, really cute. Just bringing a little bit of her nose detail back because I don't want her to be the smoothest thing in this picture. So here I'm running my unsharp mask again just to sharpen up her eyelashes, to give that detail back. Or not even so much give it back, but to make that detail pop out just a little bit. And here I just use my finishing actions to finish off the picture, and I'm going to mask my last action off of my dog's faces. This way it brings their face to the forefront a little bit too, just kind of lighten them a little bit, and baby. And there you have it, the finished image. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe, like, and comment below any questions you have, and I'll be happy to answer them. See you guys on the next video. Bye.